For those of you who don't know, Mustafa and I met in 1997 during Lee Brown's mayoral campaign, and we worked together, and that we were confined in this really small room trying to get Lee Brown elected. Anyway, our work paid off, and we've been friends ever since. And I've been so proud to watch his business grow and his place in not just in politics, but in on the national level as well. I always get excited when I've seen him on CNN or some other national outlet. But I think you're right, Mustafa. I mean, we know that we have an unemployment rate that's going to be a challenge. And here in Texas, it is 8.3. In Houston, it's much, a little bit greater than that, 9.6. Looking at my Senate district, when the pandemic started out, we were in the middle somewhere of the 31 Senate districts for the number of unemployment claims. We're now number 5. Boy, you talk about an agency that really was under the gun and needs to have some investment in terms of updating the technology and everything. And that's the Texas Workforce Commission. So many people had issues getting their unemployment claims, and that's something we'll take up for the session. But we also have to continue to diversify our economy. We're so dependent on the oil and gas industry, and we saw what was happening even before COVID with the oversaturation and global issues in Saudi Arabia and Russia. And for the first time, the Texas Railroad Commission was looking at a proration, and it didn't happen, but it just goes to show you how severe the issue was. And my district has a lot of that industry up and down 225 and the ship channel. And speaking of the ship channel, I know we'll get to that later, but that's that project, the widening and deepening, things like the Texas high-speed rail, all of those transportation projects create thousands of jobs, and our return on the investment on those type of projects and other transportation projects is so great. So I think we need to push to see what we have, what jobs are ready or sitting on the shelf, and we can push those out and start reinvesting our economy and creating more jobs in our state.
Andrew, what other questions you have?
I'll unmute. So I did want to, Rich Squire with AECOM also was commenting in the same general theme of, we know that we're going to have budget issues. And so what are some of the ways that you think the legislature is going to come up with to help fill some of those gaps? And so Mustafa's point about, certainly we want to make sure that we protect the money that's already being allotted for transportation for the very reason that it does keep jobs, it does create a return on investment, additional options for funding transportation and new ideas we also would hope would be on the table. But by the same token, we've got the rainy day fund. And so what are some of the ways that you think the legislature is open, the Senate specifically, and then maybe the House too, for helping to fill some of those gaps that we're going to have with the budget?
Yeah, last session I was on a ad hoc committee that the Lieutenant Governor put together to look at new revenue streams. And we did come up with some, because many of us weren't in support. And it was on both sides of the aisle on increasing the sales tax by $0.01. And, you may see another run at that. I'm not real supportive of that right now. And, I think looking certainly at the motor fuel tax and other things are all on the table, looking at some of the tax incentives and abatements that are in place. I know there's a lot of talk about looking at those items. How can we create new revenue streams? Many of us have, not that this is going to solve our problems right now, but just moving forward, we have to continue to have more revenue coming in. So possibly, looking at something I've pushed all along is gaming. Also, people, I don't know how everybody on this call feels, but at least the use of medical marijuana and possibly expanding that later, regulating it, taxing it. We see how other states have benefited from that. Of course, raising the servants tax, we've looked at that as well. So I think, everything's going to be on the line and everything will be on the table. I still think I mentioned this when I spoke in person at one of your lunches, but Medicaid, the expansion of Medicaid, and I know for some it's a touchy subject, but at the end of the day, we all end up paying for that. We all end up picking up that cost. We're now just one of 10 states that has not increased, expanded Medicaid. And that could have helped in this pandemic crisis. If we can, relieve the budget from one area, that frees up money to help with other things. And it makes no sense since uh, the leadership in this state has made that decision. $70 billion has been left on the table. And especially during a time when we're facing a pandemic and this is going to go on into next year, and to be prepared for the next pandemic or the second wave of this, we have to have Medicaid expanded in this state.
So I think that's a segue a little bit to Dr. Carol Lewis is on with us today. Dr. Lewis, did you want to ask your question? I think it's a great one.
Hello, Senator. How are you?
Hey,
Good to see
Carol.
you.
Oh, it's so nice to see you. I so enjoyed my time working with you at the city.
I know, it was fun. Can't believe it was as long ago as it was. Um, my question is right in the lines of what we're talking about with healthcare. And I know you've been focused on healthcare and healthcare issues for your entire tenure. We at Texas Southern University for the past few months have begun an initiative where we're linking our pharmacy and health sciences departments with our transportation. And we're looking at the nexus between transportation and health. And so I think we're all sort of learning that we've got these hard columns between many of our areas just in the public sphere, and they're really not hard lines between them. There really should be integration. People honestly can't get to healthcare sometimes, even if it's right around the corner from them. So I'm wondering, I guess a couple of things. Number one, have you heard your constituents talking about the difficulty of even moving around? And I guess to some degree that really relates to public transit more than it does to roads. The other sort of companion to that is that at the Center for Transportation, we've been doing research on how outlying areas and sort of suburban and rural low income ethnic people have trouble getting into medical care because a lot of the good medical care, especially specialty medicine, is in the urbans, and they can't get to it either. So while at first, it might sound like an urban kind of problem, it's not, and it's something that we would love to see, the entire Texas state legislature sort of take under wing. So with all of that as preamble, I'd be really, glad to hear what your thinking is about all that.
Thanks for your leadership and all you do in the transportation. And I think that's an interesting concept to tie transportation to healthcare. With the work that Metro has done, we now have Metro Rail going into the East End and to some of our communities, and hopefully that's going to be expanded even further. It's a little less of an issue, but you raise a very good point about the problem. The connection now has spread out into rural parts of Texas. And that's why now you're seeing some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle opening up to talk about Medicaid expansion, because we know that, as you said, so many of the hospitals have closed and their access to healthcare is shrinking, it's dwindling down. And people are speaking up and speaking out about that. So I hope we have a more productive conversation on that, but certainly I think we're going to be able to connect some dots on what the case you're trying to make between transportation and access to healthcare, but more so in the rural areas.
Thank you, Dr. Lewis. I want to go.
Thank you. We'll be looking forward to delving into this into greater detail.
Good, thank you.
Kind of a close second to health is safety when it comes to transportation. And I know that the Senate Committee on Transportation had an interim charge addressing this and exploring ways to get to the road to zero goal. And we've got Adam Greenfield with Walk Austin on. And so his question is, what do you expect? What policy changes do you expect to see under the umbrella of safety and Vision Zero? And are there any things that that you would want to take the lead on or support and yourself with regards to safety?
Well, and I am very much supportive of the Vision Zero initiatives. Most of them I applaud TxDOT and of course our local jurisdictions, their involvement, the city of Houston. I know this was a very controversial issue, but during my time at the city, I was supportive of the red light cameras. I felt that that was something that helped to change behavior and curve some very bad behavior of people running lights. And it was also brought a little relief to our law enforcement. And that's why you had so many chiefs of police advocate to keep it, to allow local control on that. I was supportive of it as a council member, and then my time in the House, I was very active in making sure that we could have local control. And every session they kept chipping away, and finally, the opposite side was successful, and now we don't have that. But we know that the research shows with the Vision Zero that the top three causes are the failure to stay in a lane, driving under the influence of alcohol, and of course vehicle speed. Since we have dealt with texting and driving, we know that's made some impact. If people want to share if they have any more in-depth studies on the no texting and driving, I'd love to hear how that has gone since the law has passed. But we need to keep pushing forward on that. I know we're going to talk a little bit later about some signage issues and some new technology that could help in these areas. So open for suggestions and ideas.
One of the topics that's come up in other conversations under this safety issue is reducing speed limits in residential areas. And also the Houston Public Works and Planning departments have talked about this extensively with also just urban, city streets, not just residential, that the difference, reducing it from 35 to 25 or 30 to 25 is the difference between a fatality and an injury. So I know Representative Celia Israel has been really pushing this in the House. There hasn't been a lot of traction in some of the other conversations that we've had with some Senate members, but I wasn't sure if you had any kind of sense of that. Or we did see during COVID that speed was really the issue. It was, there were not as many cars on the road. And so we thought that the daily deaths would go down significantly, and they did not. And speed was the issue. And so I just didn't know if you had any additional thoughts on that specific policy change.
Well, I'm all about local control. So to me, it would be up to the individual cities and if they want to do that. I have to admit, I'm not a slow driver. I tend to go the maximum speed. But of course, if you have the facts and the data to prove it, then I think it warrants at least some discussion.
Senator, is it different when you have the state plates and you drive fast versus if you have my plates and you drive fast?
I have no idea.
We're taking notes.
Good answer.
Well, and so Darren Willer with HNTB sent me a reminder that today at 3 p.m., Commissioner Laura Ryan, TxDOT Commissioner Laura Ryan, and Mayor Turner are going to be doing a joint press conference talking about Vision Zero Houston. So I will put the link to that in the chat box. So thank you, Darren.
We'll make sure that somebody watches it too.
Yes.
Tomorrow.
Yeah. So I want to go back and talk about specific items related to transportation funding that might or might not be on the table. we have our legislative agenda, which we've tiered. You've got everything on there, but then we've said, okay, so top three. One of them is alternatively fueled vehicles and capturing that revenue that is kind of just sitting on the table, potential revenue. As technology advances, how do we ensure that we're still collecting funds to maintain and build the infrastructure that we will still need to use? Senator Nichols, Chairman Nichols, prior to COVID was talking about it extensively. Last session, we worked really closely with Mondo Martinez in the House for legislation. The devil's in the details, of course. How is it collected? Where does it go? How do we assess the formula? Thoughts on any conversations that the Senate Transportation Committee has had in the interim, or just kind of the appetite for moving forward on that policy change?
Well, we really haven't done much because of COVID on interim charges. But I think as far as the conversation goes, we have to look at it. And you're right, the devil is in the details. How do you do it? I know there's been a couple of things on the table. Do you go by the distance that somebody drives, or do you try to find another formula? And I'm open to discussion on that, but I do agree that we have to address it. There has to be some level playing field. I'm curious to know if y'all are weighing in on one side or the other when it comes to how you assess it, how you charge it.
So our legislation last session specified that it would be an annual collection tied to your registration fee. And it would be assessed. We had said, I think it was about $100 annually, was based on the formula of kind of average miles driven in a year. But the issue is that some other legislation said 200 annually, someone at a sliding scale. And then it gets into the larger conversation of vehicle miles traveled versus gas tax, funding. And some of our conversations, so one of our Legend Learns was with Vice Chairman Kelly Hancock, and while he didn't say VMTs, that's really what he was saying, was that before we start to look at just alternatively fueled vehicles and collecting that revenue, that we need to look at the whole funding system and the gas tax in of itself, because it's aging out as a funding source.
Yeah.
So
a long time ago. I mean, something has to be done, and I would hope that we can. I mean, the COVID has caused so many issues to slow us down for the getting started in the session, interim charges and things like that. But I would think that you have some time to have conversations with members of the committee and certainly the chairman. But it would be nice to have something to walk into in January with at least an indication of where there is support for.
Right. Well, and there's a study, I think December 1, it was supposed to come out. I think Celia Israel said it might be coming out even in November, that was commissioned for the DMV to review the actual amount of percentage of people that are actually utilizing alternatively fueled vehicles, so we can start to gather some more data and make a more informed decision. I know Chairman Nichols has talked about that report as kind of one of the pieces and one of the steps to making some legislation that's meaningful and that is impactful in that way. So more to come on that.
Yeah, and I'd rather have this discussion than deciding whether or not Tesla can have car lots.
Right.
That is a crazy big battle, and it's you're caught between Tesla and the auto dealers, and I think having this kind of I'd rather focus on this than that.
Right. No, and I think that there is an agreement that something needs to be done because it is a revenue piece. It's just, do we have enough time to build some consensus around the how of it? So Mustafa, I think, wanted to add to that.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of this it's been, I think there's a consensus that something needs to be done, but the ball doesn't really move until people take leadership of it. And so our ask is that, is this something that you can spend some time on and trying to drive this? Because this,
no pun intended.
yeah.
Drive.
Right, drive that legislation, right? Because
What- Should I be in a driver's seat on this?
She'll drive fast.
yeah, you can drive it faster. But I think that well, the challenge we run into in these things is that if we don't do something now, at some point there will be commercial vehicles, trucks, and others that are also electric. And there'll be fleets that will start to transition into it potentially. And if that stuff happens, then it gets harder to add them into the revenue stream because you've got a strong advocacy that's coming in there with it, right? So, like, if we don't create the structures for revenue now, the same problem we're having with creating revenues in other places is that there's always a big group pushing back against it because nobody wants to be
Right.
on the short end of this thing. So when it comes to alternative vehicles, we think timing is now, and timing is urgent, because with each session that goes by that we don't do something, we're making it harder on ourselves to do something.
Yeah, and you make a really strong point. Do it now, before the usage gets even higher. We know that the A&M Transportation Institute predicted that the use for cars and trucks would be about 18% and 11% for commercial by 2040. So I know that sounds like a long way off, but I think it would be beneficial to start that now. Plus, we need the money. We need the revenues.
Yeah, and it's a revenue stream that will grow regardless how you structure it,
Absolutely.
because we know there's going to be more cars using electricity. There's
Right.
there's an increase in revenue session after session after session.
Mhm.
Right. And then I wanted to follow up too. We talked a little, it is a conversation about whether or not we restructure the financing of transportation as it relates to the gas tax in general, right? That's well intent. The intentions are great there, but we know how long will that take to actually come to an agreement on how we would restructure the financing for transportation. So in the meantime, one of our other top tier items is just indexing the gas tax. So not increasing it, but just making sure that it's indexed. I don't know what your thoughts are on that. Specifically, it's a little less politically volatile than trying to increase anything, and certainly the case has been made many times since it's not been touched since the 90s.
Yeah, I think 1991 is what it is. Sure, I'm open to that, but we really have to start narrowing down these conversations, and we're already, well into November, and things are starting to move fast. So I would urge you to try to pinpoint these top issues and start having some very, detailed conversations. I think you're at that point where you've really got to start drilling down on the numbers and the formulas.
Right.
Because the other thing too, there's some unknowns. I don't know how we're going to interact in the session. There, may be fewer bills filed, fewer bills referred to committee, fewer bills passed. The logistics of how we interact with trade associations and the lobby, there's not going to be as much FaceTime with one another.
Right.
And it's not going to be like normal where you just walk into somebody's office and you can visit with the staffer or find the elected official. Those things are not going to be like they used to. So it's even more important to try to narrow down some of these issues and come up with some, on paper, some hard numbers.
Right. Well, and I think too, it is a comfort, we've had certainly, and we appreciate you've been very willing to have a lot of these discussions and sessions and, interviews. Not everybody is as comfortable with that. Not all elected officials are. And it has been an extreme challenge for some senior, for us to engage with some senior leadership in this way. And so, that I think will be a challenge as well. In the session. And I think your point about less bills filed is, we've heard that's kind of been a resounding theme in a lot of these conversations. And so, the comment was choose wisely, I think, from Representative Sean Theory. She said, choose wisely. So I hear you. I think it is a kind of a one hand, we hear everything's on the table potentially, right? And then on the other hand, but we're going to have such a limited amount of opportunities and conversations and bills filed. So both are accurate.
Your issues bring revenues. You're actually
Right.
bringing something to the table. And that's why I press upon is start to finalize and crystallize numbers and formulas and options and to show what the revenue streams would bring in.
Right. Okay. And we've definitely started to have some of those conversations. I think now that the leadership is starting to gel in the House too, I think, and the dust is settling, then those deeper conversations can actually, start to grow more. I want to go back to, you mentioned the sales tax conversation, and while garnering support for sales tax increase of any kind is always a challenge, it does speak to a broader issue of the local control conversation too, that you talked about. And so one of the things that we've asked for, we've advocated for, is to just raise the cap at the state. We have to have the state enable that legislation to raise the cap so that as localities can have the option to do it. Right now, they don't even have that option. And it speaks to a larger issue, whether it's, wanting to raise vehicle registration fees locally. There's even been conversations, some county judges have said, well, I actually think I could make a case for a local gas tax if they know that it's going to go to fund specific transportation projects. But again, not having that flexibility to do that. So we're in an arena where everybody's trying to find ways to help themselves and not have to rely on state or federal. What are your thoughts on that traction going into the session?
I'm open to that. Again, just coming from being an elected office on the local level, I'm always supportive of giving counties and cities local control, local authority to do what they feel needs to be done within their jurisdiction. But as you know, I mean,
it's a tough, yeah.
Session after session, there has been such a, an attack on local government entities, and we've heard it loud and clear from certain statewide elected officials about law enforcement and local government. And, I'm just leery that, that could spread to other things when it comes to local government. So.
Right. Well, so speaking of local control and jurisdictions, I know Jeff Collins, are you still on? I know he had a question. I think it was related to redistricting.
I'm here. Can y'all hear me?
Oh yeah, there's that too.
Senator, how are you today? Good seeing you.
Hey, good seeing you.
Just a quick, and I don't really want to hear about the politics of redistricting, maybe, but what I'd like to hear about a little bit is more the procedural aspects of it. I mean, I know you went through it, I believe, early in your House years.
Yes.
And now you're at the Senate, but I mean, the dynamics, I would assume the Senate draws their lines, the House draws their lines, and then I know you have to get a certified census numbers, and depending on when that is, kind of tells about when y'all start that process. But could you tell us just a little bit about that whole process and how that may play into this? I'm sure you're probably looking at a special session because you're probably not going to get the numbers during the regular.
Right. They're telling us towards the end of the session, we'll get those numbers. So at this point, we would have already visited cities all across the state. We had a calendar to make our way around Texas. And we're not sure if we're going to be able to do that at some point or if it will be done virtually. We are having ongoing meetings right now with Senator Huffman about how we want to proceed with that. So still, a few things up in the air about that, but we have to get the congressional lines drawn to State Board of Education. I know just in my district, I have to go out and get several thousand people these Senate districts are large and they're increasing. Right now, we're close to 900,000 in a lot of Senate districts, and that's going to increase because of the growth that we've had. But, the redistricting process it brings out a lot of divisiveness, and sometimes it's not, sometimes it is partisan, a lot of times it is, and then a lot of times it's, between members and who's on what side of the street, or they want this university in their district, or a certain neighborhood in their district. So it really gets down to the details. But we'll have that to contend with, along with everything else.
Everything else, right? Thanks.
Senator, you talked about it a little bit throughout, mentioned not knowing what it's going to really look like and how you're going to be able to have some of these conversations. We've heard, pieces of ideas that are being tossed around and some decisions that are being made. Do you allow in-person testimony? Is it online, or is it going to go on endlessly if it's online? Those kinds of things. So from your lens and your vantage point, talking about the Senate, what is your best guess for what that is going to look like, whether you're on the floor or you're having kind of these policy discussions and committee hearings?
Yeah, as far as the floor, we have a little more advantage. We have more room to spread out.
Right.
And we could easily take turns being on the floor if needed. As far as the hearings go, that seems to be the sticking point of where we are. I'd like to see a hybrid, depending on what the subject matter is, what the bill is, and what you can anticipate for testimony. But I think I'd like to see both, to have virtual and some limited in person. And I've been asking trade associations and people who normally come and testify how they would like to testify. And so far, most are saying in person.
Right. I would think that would be the preference. But then how do you manage that from a sheer numbers?
You can't
standpoint?
have everybody in the hearing room. You would have to spread people out, and you'd have to have an overflow room, or maybe a paging or texting system. So when it's your time, then you come into the room. So they're looking at a lot of things. And of course, for the members, I think they're looking at plexiglass and things like that. So
Right.
I would want masks to be mandatory, whether you're a member or coming into the hearing room.
I'm curious too, as we look, a lot of these groups that have their traditional kind of advocacy days where they would come down.
I don't see that happening.
Right. And we would come down kind of end of February, would be normally, or up, we would go up. So we've already started to have some conversations with officials, some creative things that we might be able to do. So we really look forward to having you as part of that conversation, whatever we decide and however we think it would work best with the format that is chosen, to try to do something where we can engage in some way. That's what it's been about with all of this virtual stuff. It's been about creativity and flexibility, and a lot of empathy and grace when things don't work exactly the way that they always have. So really appreciate you kind of walking us through that and what that might look like. And certainly that in of itself will limit the amount of bills that are able to be heard, processed, and passed, because you're just not going to, there's going to be so much that's surrounding that process and trying to get those through, that in of itself is going to slow it down. So I wanted to kind of close out. If you had an ask for us, you mentioned kind of drilling down on some of the numbers, bringing the revenue numbers to the table. That's so helpful. If there's anything else that you can, any kind of other advice that you can, or wisdom that you want to bestow on us as we go towards session.
I think that's the big ask, is narrow down what you can bring to the table. What you're talking about, what you have to offer, is revenue generating. And that's what we need now more than ever. And try to talk to as many members like this as you can before the session starts, because there's going to be limited access to the building, limited access to the members. So more of these type of conversations you can have before we even get there. I think that's beneficial.
Okay.
Thank
Well,
y'all for having me.
Thank you so much, Senator. Always a pleasure. You have to know a lot about a lot. That's what I say about you. So, and you are always willing to have a conversation. So we appreciate you. We look forward to more conversations and staying in touch. And just a reminder to everybody that Monday we will have Representative Jim Murphy, and he'll be able to talk through his lens and share some wisdom with us.
Have a lot more to say on the speaker's race than I do.
Yeah.
By then, who knows?
Who knows, right? Who knows? And just a reminder too, we are in, we are in their membership renewal drive. So Esmeralda is going to put the link to our membership page in the chat box for those that haven't had a chance to visit our website. And we want everybody to have a great rest of the day and week. Try to get some sleep and stop watching all the coverage. And thank you for your service, Senator. We really appreciate you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Senator.
Great day.